I was interviewing with this woman named Sandy. She goes, "Why do you want to do makeup here?" I was like, "I don't know who does the makeup here, but I could do makeup circles around them." And she said, "Oh, really? I do the makeup here." And I was like, so when I was a kid, I loved horror films so much that I wanted to make monsters. I thought, well, I should be a doctor because Dr. Frankenstein makes monsters. Well, my dad cut in and was like, doctors don't make monsters, makeup artists make monsters. And I was like, wow, revelation. It blew my mind. So I literally just ran to the library and I got all the information I could find in our local Linwood, New Jersey library on the art of makeup and the people who did it, like Lon Chaney. Lon Chaney was an actor in silent film era. He was an actor who did his own makeup. So he created the original Phantom of the Opera, the scary one, not the musical. And he created the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Vampire for London After Midnight. But he was a character actor. He created hundreds and hundreds of characters for silent films. And so he would literally come to the studio gate every morning and they'd call out what they needed for the day because they could be doing a dozen pictures at the same time because it's silent movies. You don't hear the sound. So they could shooting one side of the street, they're shooting a Western. The other side, they're shooting, a war movie. Well, he would listen to what they needed. And as soon as they called out whatever, we need 10 pirates or we need, sailors or we need cowboys, he would open up his makeup kit and do his makeup real fast. And he got picked all the time to be in all these movies. Eventually, of course, they took notice of him and they started giving him bigger roles. And eventually he was one of the biggest stars of the silent era. I was just always at the library collecting as much information as possible on all these iconic people, Jack Pierce, and I discovered Stage Makeup by Richard Corson. It was a textbook. It had all these different kinds of makeups in it, but it featured a makeup by one makeup artist who just really stood out. And it was Dick Smith's makeup for a show called Mark Twain Tonight, where he turned actor Hal Holbrook into Mark Twain and using foam latex prosthetics. And I was just blown away. This is what I want to do. So now I started gathering information on this Dick Smith. I found out he wrote a book called The Do-It-Yourself Monster Makeup Handbook. Well, that became my Bible. I would just read that book every single day. I would go through it and I would try to recreate the makeups in the book. It was written for people like me who didn't have experience. I was able to follow the steps and recreate these makeups. It just really got me into a much higher level than just, me painting my face in the bedroom, In
the darkest reaches of the mind, there has never been anything like Brigantine. Alive again, with even more surprises than before.
When I was 15, this giant haunted house opened up in my area. The haunted house was called the Brigantine Castle, and it was a 5-story castle that was built just to be a haunted house on an amusement pier. So it was a very sort of summer, amusement kind of thing. And I'm walking through this place and it's like, wow, this is amazing. I have to work here. And I applied for a job. I was interviewing with this woman named Sandy. She goes, "Why do you want to do makeup here?" I was like, well, I went through last summer and, I was thinking to myself, I don't know who does the makeup here, but I could do makeup circles around them. And she said, "Oh, really? I do the makeup here." And I was like, I paused for a second. I said, "You know what, Sandy? I stand by what I said. Give me a shot. I'll show you." And she goes, "All right, Michael, you got balls. I'm going to hire you. We'll give you a shot." And then she put me in a cage for 2 weeks. The only makeup I was allowed to do was on myself. I was actually a monster in a cage for a good couple of weeks. And she wouldn't let me do anyone else's makeup. And one day, her assistant got sick and she couldn't come into work. And Sandy couldn't handle all the actors by herself. And she said, "All right, Mike, here's your shot." And she let me do makeup. and I stood by my word, and I did makeup circles around her. And from that point on, I was a makeup artist every day. Later in the season, she actually quit, left the place, and I became the head makeup artist by default. I worked there for 6 years, 6 seasons, 20 makeups in 2 hours every morning, and 20 makeups in 2 hours every night. I got very, very fast. That efficiency really helps later on in the film industry, but I felt that I couldn't do any more. I couldn't get any better working at a haunted house. And I always wanted to work on movies. I wanted to come to Hollywood and be a movie makeup artist.
Brigantine Castle, it's alive.
You know, none of us knew that Return of the Living Dead was going to be this huge cult classic with, you know, people shouting brains and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I go to set, my first time ever on a movie set. I worked on shop work on films, but I had never been on a movie set. And so my first day on a movie set was on Return of the Living Dead. And I go there and Kenny leads me to a table. He goes, here's your space, here's your prosthetic, here's your actor. And I'm like, okay. And I put my kit down, I opened it up, and the prosthetic was foam latex. And at this point in my life, I had created foam latex pieces at the shop, but I had never applied a foam latex piece. I had applied some like slip latex, hollow latex pieces that I made myself, but I had never applied a foam latex piece. And I was thinking to myself, well, if I could do it with a slip latex, of course I could do a foam latex piece. No problem. And I start doing the makeup, and the guys on each side of me are like, slow down, Mike. And I'm like, what? Slow down, you're going too fast, you're making us look bad. And I'm like, guys, this is my pace. This is how I work. I've been in the haunted house business my whole life. Kenny comes over, looks at it, he goes, holy bleep. And I'm like, what? He goes, you're finished. I was like, yeah. He goes, it looks great. I was like, thanks. He goes, here, have another. And he parked another zombie in my chair, and I did another makeup. And I was finished both of my makeups before these guys finished their first one. At the end of the night, Kenny said, can you work the rest of the movie? And I was like, yes. And so I was on set for the rest of the film. I was able to prove my worth just from having that haunted house experience of being able to work quickly. And I was back working at MEL on Star Trek The Next Generation. And I was doing these Cobra Man heads. They were ambassadors from another planet, of course. And Steve Wang happened to be visiting. Steve is very well revered in this industry. Steve, along with Matt Rose, created the Predator, the original Predator, the creature from the Black Lagoon and Monster Squad. Steve is a fantastic artist and probably one of the best painters that's ever been in this industry. And Steve came over and he was watching me paint, and he goes, you know, Stan Winston's going to be needing some painters on this new show. You should go over there and get a job. So because of Steve, basically I got the courage up to call the Stan Winston studio and get a job there. And within a very short time, I was the head of the paint department at Stan's, and I worked as the head painter there on some of their biggest pictures. So, and that was all thanks to Steve Wang saying, go for it. There was a crossroads at one point where I was working for Stan on Terminator 2, and I had helped out Kevin Yeager at one point on an episode of Tales from the Crypt. After that episode on Tales from the Crypt, Kevin was like, hey, we're going to start the next season soon. Would you run set for me? And I was like, oh, I would love to. Because Tales from the Crypt, the movie Tales from the Crypt, when I was a kid, is the only movie that ever gave me a nightmare. Santa Claus is coming to kill me, right? And that was from the movie. Well, they also did an episode of Tales from the Crypt from that story of Santa Claus coming to kill Bob Zemeckis' wife. The following season was a different story. Kevin backed off. He didn't want to do the show anymore. He was only going to do the Crypt Keeper puppet. You know, he would direct the Crypt Keeper sequences and make sure the Crypt Keeper was in working order, right? Because it was a puppet. So I was hired to do the whole show. At the end of the second season, we did an episode called Yellow with Kirk Douglas and Dan Aykroyd, and Bob Zemeckis directed it. We got nominated for Best Makeup, so I got an Emmy nomination for that show. And then the following season, I was nominated for another Emmy, and also Cable Ace Awards. I did tons and tons of low-budget horror films, had some great, interesting projects that people wouldn't think of a makeup artist doing, but I got to create a mane for a lion for the movie Out of Africa. You know, when I started working at Stan Winston's, then I started working on much bigger films. Alien Nation, Leviathan, Predator 2, I was in charge of painting all the Predators. At the same time we were doing that, we were working on Edward Scissorhands. One of our other instructors here, Andy Schoenberg, actually created the Scissorhands. My job on that was to paint the Winona Ryder age makeup. Terminator 2, anytime you see a Terminator on screen, I had something to do with it. Iron Man 3 came later on. We're working on doing all these burn makeups because the chemical that's affecting everyone that makes them burst into flames. We also had a really cool exploding head to do of actor Ashley Hamilton, George Hamilton's son. So he's the one that explodes at the Chinese theater early in the film. And we created this really beautiful life cast of him with, you know, open mouth, and we sculpted the eyes open, and he looked like he was really in pain and everything. And then the production says, oh, we're just gonna do it all digital, don't worry about it, we're not gonna do it. We also did a really cool pair of hands for Robert Downey, because if you recall in the film, he's running down the street handcuffed, and it's actually Robert Downey doing it. So they didn't want, if he fell, he could get hurt. So he had fake arms behind him that were handcuffed, and his real hands were in front of him to break his fall if he were to trip. I started teaching here at CMS in 2011. I taught a little bit in the 80s and I loved it. And then when the opportunity came to teach at Cinema Makeup School, it seemed like the right time for me. I didn't really want to work on set much anymore. I love teaching. I love to see when they get it, when I'm able to communicate to them and demonstrate for them how to do it, and they go, I got it. It's very rewarding to me.